Reporting and supporting what matters, this is CT Examiner Weekly.
I'm reporter Charlotte Harvey with the latest on the Bridgeport Board of Education's request recently for a $106 million operating budget, more than double the budget proposed by the interim superintendent.
In Connecticut, there's a growing trend of court-ordered electroshock therapy unfolding within the probate court system, igniting debate over its impact on individual lives and civil liberties. I'm reporter Amy Wu with the latest.
With this year's legislative session taking place right before an election for governor, there are a lot of promises and proposals. I'm reporter Ally LeMaster, and I will be updating you on the latest.
I'm your host, Brian Scott Smith, and along with our reporters, I'm joined by Greg Stroud, Editor-in-Chief, and Robin Breeding, our Arts Editor. Welcome to you all. School budgets are always a hit or miss affair, but this time in Bridgeport, the Board of Education really raised some eyebrows when they requested an additional $106 million more for their operating budget, which was more than double what the school superintendent had proposed just weeks before. Our reporter Charlotte Harvey joins us now to explain more about where the figure came from and what reaction it got. Charlotte.
Yes, there was a vote of 6-2 in favor of the proposed $106 million increase in the operating budget, with one abstention. It is more than double what the recommended superintendent's budget was that he gave 2 weeks ago of $44.1 million. That was a raise of approximately 14.97%, around 15%. This is upwards of 36% of an increase, which is really unprecedented.
So Charlotte, tell us, from your reporting, I understand that this got voted through by the Board of Education, but they knew it was going to cause an issue.
Yes, they did know it was going to cause an issue. Actually, the two no votes were specifically because they thought it was an unrealistic ask. And the board members who did vote for it recognized that it was an unrealistic ask, but said that it was necessary to do so, that if they didn't ask, they'd never get it.
Greg.
So, Charlotte, when we look at school budget requests, I mean, normally a 5% increase, that's about what we're seeing in Stanford. That's pretty average these days since COVID. 10%, wow, that's kind of high, but 36% is really high. And do you know what's driving that? What do they want to spend the money on? Where are they falling short?
Well, the increase from the budget that the superintendent recommended was an attempt to restore things that have been cut over the past decade or so, past 13 years. So getting positions back in place as far as paras, social workers, psychologists, technology that's been cut, new textbooks, all the things that have been put by the wayside over the years to try to save money, they're trying to restore. So that's where the additional $60 million comes in on top of the $44 million that the superintendent was recommending.
Let me just ask you a question, Charlotte. At the actual meeting where the vote was held, was the superintendent there of schools? And If so, did they give any reaction? Because as we've said, this is more than double what they had put forward, just a couple of weeks ago. Can you give us a little bit of insight maybe on their reaction? So
interim superintendent Dr. Avery Royce really didn't have much reaction. I asked him after the meeting what he felt about this recommendation, and he seemed a little uncomfortable, actually, and said, well, this is what they're asking for. I gave them my recommendation, and this is what they're voting for.
Greg.
I think what we're seeing is that, the legislative session has started up in Hartford, as has the race for governor. And that's having an effect down in our towns, in our budgets, in our school districts. And in the case of Bridgeport in particular, it's also a political machine. It's a place that turns out a lot of votes. And in some ways, you could look at this as a bit of a power play maybe in Bridgeport, because they're saying, hey, we're not getting the funding from the state that we did 10 years ago, and we'd like to build back what we've lost. And Charlotte, you were saying some positions, it's jobs, it's technology, this is a district that actually, compared to, they like to compare themselves to Greenwich. 30 miles away, and they're not getting the same money per student, and they'd like that from the state. Is that fair?
I think that is really fair. One of the points that kept being raised was that the ECS allocation model hasn't been changed in nearly 13 years, not to adjust for inflation or cost of living rises. So it has stayed stagnant at that 13%, even though costs have gone up. So they're trying to do the same amount with a less amount of money.
Touching on that ECS, that's become a big issue. There was actually an event just recently, and I know that Justin Elliker, the mayor of New Haven, mentioned about the ECS payment and that they've been increasing. And I think that the state's contribution was nothing more than about 1%, which he said obviously didn't help the situation. Greg, you had a point.
So, I mean, ECS, this is educational cost sharing. It's been an idea that's been around since the 1970s, right? There was a court case, Horton versus Meskel, that basically said that it affirmed that every student in Connecticut had a right to an education. And so there's this growing idea that the education has to be sufficient, or you can't just have fabulous educations in Greenwich and lousy educations in Bridgeport. And so how do you do that when schools are mainly funded with property taxes? And so it's easy in Greenwich where there's, millions and millions of dollars of property. But what about Bridgeport, a city that's been hollowed out? And the state has sort of stepped in, but have they really lived up to those commitments? And I think Bridgeport is trying to say, no, you haven't. And you haven't even lived up to what you did 10 years ago. And with the inflation adjustment, I know we've gone through, inflation is a huge issue across the country, and there too. And it's an election year. Never forget that.
Okay, Charlotte, quick final comment from you. Was there any comment as to whether or not this is actually going to get passed, even though the Board of Education has basically said we're voting for it? Was there any sense that they're actually going to get this money?
It seemed as though they were coming from the position of we are going to aim high and negotiate down.
Which makes sense. We're going to have to leave it there. Charlotte, thanks ever so much. Good story, great reporting. No problem at all. I know you have to jump off as well. That's Charlotte Harvey, our reporter, reporting there on the Bridgeport Board of Education recently. He remembers saying no to shock therapy. The procedure was something he had thought about after his psychologist and psychiatrist at the Institute of Living in Hartford, where he was also being treated after his latest suicide attempt, had recommended it. Our reporter Amy Wu joins us now with this story. Amy, to start with, give us the background on the individual we're talking about in this case.
The individual is Chris Doobie. He's a Connecticut native, and he 20 years ago received electroshock therapy at the Institute of Living, where he was an inpatient. It was forced electroshock therapy because it was a decision that was made in probate court in Hartford.
Just to explain to us then, for people listening to this, when we talk about electroshock therapy, can you just help the listener understand what does that mean? Because I think people get an idea in their head based on maybe things that possibly they've seen elsewhere.
Electroshock therapy is a type of therapy used in the most severe cases, often by psychiatrists. For cases often where patients have already tried other treatments, whether it be medication specifically that did not work. I've interviewed several physicians, including the chair of psychiatry at the Institute of Living, who say they use it on catatonic patients.
So again, just to help listeners understand, when we're talking about this is electricity which is introduced to the brain. So it's almost like trying to reset the brain?
I think, Brian, you hit it on the mark. It's often described as resetting the brain with electrical currents. It's now done under anesthesia in earlier treatment. It was actually introduced in the 1800s, so it's been around for a while. And it used to be done without anesthesia as well, but now it's under general anesthesia that it would be done.
So Amy, do we have a sense? Can you give the listeners a sense of like roughly how many people voluntarily or involuntarily get this procedure? Because I know some people actually sign up. They have depression, they have other issues, and the doctors recommend this, and they say, okay, I'll try it. So how many people are getting this in America? And roughly how many people, at least involuntarily, are getting it in Connecticut?
So the figure that is the most current is about roughly 100,000 people are getting electroshock therapy in the U.S., but that is a combined, with voluntary, as you noted, and also involuntary. Here in Connecticut, what's interesting is that I spoke with Jim Flannery, who is a Connecticut native, mental health advocate, himself has been he himself experienced for psychiatric treatment, and he FOIA'd the state, and the state came back with some, I think, very interesting numbers where there has been since 2020 an increase of petitions across all probate districts, and an increase from about 123 cases in 2018 to 193 cases in 2024. Still awaiting some of the statistics and data, though, from a full year of 2025. So it would appear that the cases are rising here in Connecticut.
So is there any sense why this is on the increase? I thought, I think for a lot of listeners, they have these popular conceptions of electroconvulsive therapy is what a lot of doctors call it. So, from, say, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or Francis. And these are sort of horrific procedures that no one would voluntarily ever submit to. But what's changed or why doctors aren't in the business to hurt people. So why do people get this on a voluntary basis? And are there specific cases where doctors have told you, this is a good thing?
Well, in terms of the efficacy of electroshock therapy has been, within the medical field, has been proven to work on some individuals for sure, especially with major depression, severe depression, and so forth. But in terms of involuntary, why are there an increase of cases of the involuntary? I spoke with Kathy Flaherty, the executive director of the Connecticut Legal Rights Project. She herself, who went through in this case voluntary ECT treatment, and she actually couldn't offer a single cause for the rise, but there might be several potential reasons. Including a growing reliance on court authorization. Maybe previously some institutions may have been okay with the patient consent. There's also the possibility of more physicians are using ECT as well. And in the field of psychiatry, I spoke with the chair, Dr. Javid Sukhera at the Institute of Living, Greg, and he said that it is often used in the most severe cases, but the physicians, the psychiatrists are able to move forth if they decide that it's needed.
Robin, final question on this because we do need to move on.
Yeah, Amy, I'm curious about the legality of the probate system and how they gain so much control over the mental health of someone, because obviously the parents in the case of Mr. Doobie said that they did not want this to happen. Mr. Doobie himself, he said he didn't want it to happen. And probate, which usually deals with things like wills, is now in charge of taking care of somebody's mental health in a major way, and the parents were against it.
Yeah. So at the probate court does decide, whether or not the therapy goes forward. And it's basically, it can be forced on people where two treatments didn't work or the person lacks the legal capacity to give informed consent. And the probate court judge would decide this. Based on interviews and reporting, number of the sources, including Kathy Flaherty, have said that there's problems within the probate court itself. So often it's packed with different cases, and the judges are going by the testimonials, often leaning towards the physicians themselves. Yeah.
Fascinating story. Amy, we're going to have to leave it there, but great reporting, and thanks for bringing that story to us. And our final story today is about the new 2026 legislative session that started on February 4th and will end around early May. It's a short session this year, and there will also be elections for governor as well as other representatives and senators later in the year. Ally LeMaster was at the Capitol when the 2026 session started and joins us now. Ally, what was the day like?
I had a short day at the Capitol. There was a press conference held about extending the eligibility for early parole for those under 26 years old. I think before the legislative session started, there's a lot of emphasis on Department of Correction and a lot of stuff going on there. I know the Ombuds put out a report which kind of said the department's running on I believe sustained institutional failure. So we're looking at legislation kind of dealing with things similar to that.
Just before we get into more of that, what was the energy like? Because I think, you can watch it on television, but you were actually there. Give us a sense of, what's it like to actually be in the chambers and when this is all kicking off?
It's really interesting. It's kind of overwhelming when you're just like standing there in a sea of people. I think what's funny is the State of the State speech, of course, the state legislature is predominantly Democrats. So, there's a lot of clapping, a lot of stops for that. I know in particular, Lamont was very critical of ICE, told them to go home. And during that, you had Democrats banging on their desks, standing ovations. And at the same time, you had Republicans walking out and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of energy, definitely.
Yeah, it's the first time he's been quite so direct, isn't it? Lamont, obviously, towards ICE. Greg.
So it's a short legislative session. Mm-hmm. But we've got a long campaign coming up for governor. So do you have a sense of what can actually be accomplished in this short session, what they want to accomplish? And do you think it pretty much all has to do with the coming state campaigns?
It's a great question. It's really a question of what they can do. The budget for fiscal year 2027 has already been set. The short session is supposed to come in and do budget adjustments. And what we're seeing, with the gubernatorial campaign is you're seeing a lot of legislation being pushed forward, a lot of excitement at this legislation, and a big question of, hey, we only have until about the first week of May. How much can go forward? What are we looking at here?
Not to be a cynic, I've been noticing in my emails ever since, obviously, the session started, a lot of stuff coming out of the governor's office and a lot of freebies being given away and a lot of money. And like I said, it's a little bit cynical, but it's like you sort of can tell it is election year.
Yeah, no, I think press people for the state are going full charge. Everyone's very available. You're seeing Lamont at a lot of press conferences. You're seeing Attorney General Tong and a lot of senators, being very available and holding these conferences.
Are you hearing that the budget has enough sort of fat or enough slack to actually give out more? Do you expect there will be any big adjustments? Are you hearing any spending on daycare or on the schools or ECS or something else where you expect there might be a significant outlay of funding?
I think that's a good question. I think it's a little early in the session to exactly tell. I know the Appropriations Committee recently, I believe in Lamont's proposed budget for 2027, he wants to add $16 million to the Department of Correction budget. I believe that was one of the first budgets they went over, and there seemed to be a lot of disagreement with a lot of prison reform advocates and that sort of thing. But I think we'll see across the board. Education will be a big one, as Charlotte's story mentioned earlier, and I think healthcare and that sort of thing.
So, Ally, up in Hartford, what are you hearing from the Republicans? Do you think are they, as the minority, are they just pretty much, are they spectators in this? Or do you think that they have something that they can accomplish? Or is it mainly about messaging? And if it's messaging, what are they saying?
So it's interesting. I think the governor's race kind of complicates a lot of it, and especially the Republicans' position. We're seeing Senator Ryan Fazio being kind of one of the most outspoken members of his party, proposing things that aren't in line with Lamont's proposals and that sort of thing.
So Fazio is one of the leading he's one of the leading Republican competitors for governor.
Right.
So he's trying a contrast,
yep.
And so that's actually one advantage he has potentially over Aaron Stewart, the former mayor of New Britain, who's also running, but she doesn't have a seat at the table, right? She doesn't have a seat in the legislature to make the news that Fazio might.
Yeah, and you also have Representative Josh Elliott, who is running against Lamont on the Democratic side. So,
Fazio, is it me, or has he just suddenly seemed to have come from nowhere? Because I didn't really hear a lot about him before he suddenly decided he wanted to become governor.
You know, he's a fairly new member of the legislature. We have a trend of people coming from Greenwich and running, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. He happens to be in Greenwich. He made, I have to say, nationwide, we're having this conversation about affordability. And we hear it more from Democrats right now nationally than we do from Republicans. But in the state of Connecticut, it was Ryan Fazio, I think, that really hung his hat on affordability as a response to the Democrats' more narrow targeting of affordable housing. So in a sense, Fazio said, you say affordable housing, we say, doesn't everything have to be affordable? And that was his response, and I think he's been riding it.
Amy.
I did have a question regarding the, for example, the food security SNAP benefits. I mean, with the cuts on the federal level, was there any discussion on what would be done in the coming budget year?
So I believe that the legislature voted to extend powers for Lamont for some of the money in case there are federal cuts.
So there is an emergency budget. There's a separate pot of money that Lamont can use to offset cuts on the federal level, right? So it's an easier way from doing this. But I think did Lamont really take a stand in his State of the State address for universal school breakfast? Was that something?
Yes, yeah. And I think what was interesting in his State of the State speech is he kind of boasted about Connecticut's fiscal health, and he kind of painted a grim picture of the United States. But in Connecticut, we have these emergency funds. He was like, we can back anything up if cuts happen. So that was the picture he painted.
I know that the Republicans are not happy about the fact that he wants to retain power of the $500 million emergency fund. I think there's about $330 odd million left in there because of what they spent, because he had apparently previously said that it was there for an emergency. They say the emergency isn't there anymore, and it should have been handed back, obviously, to them. Greg?
It's one of those interesting things we're seeing both on the federal level and mirrored down on the state level, which is this question of who has the power of the purse. And up on the federal level, Republicans seem to be pretty happy to give more of the power of the purse to the president. But on the state level, it might be the flip. And it sort of depends on who's in power.
We're going to have to leave it there. Great reporting as well, Ally LeMaster, there on the 2026 legislative session. Time now to take a look at some events happening in and around the state with our arts editor, Robin Breeding. Robin, we got to you eventually. What have you got for us?
Well, I'd start out today by asking people to donate blood. Right now, there's a real severe platelet and blood shortage across America, and the Red Cross could really use people to get in there and donate some blood. So with the cold weather, a lot of blood drives have been canceled. And if you go to find a location near you, that would be great.
redcrossblood.org, just so that people find it. So redcrossblood.org, the website to find your location. Next one for us.
Okay. March 6th through March 28th at Yale Rep in New Haven is Eugene Ionesco's Rhinoceros, and it's directed by Liz Diamond. If most people, I think, are pretty familiar with this play, it's a long-time favorite. It's an adaptation that's set in a small French town, and the main character is having a drink at a terrace, and all of a sudden giant rhinoceroses come across the stage and they start crushing everything. And it's basically about how a person has to decide whether to go along with the crowd or stand up for what they believe is right. And so it's pretty much a timely piece right now that Yale's doing to make people think about herd mentality. And I think it looks to be a promising production.
Sounds good. March 6th to March 28th at the Yale Repertory in New Haven. What else have you got for us?
All right. March 8th through August 23rd is the Whitney Museum's 82nd biennial. And I think it's just making people aware that it's just beginning. It's the longest running survey of contemporary art in the United States. And this year's theme is about forms of relationality, which is meaning like the idea of connections and relationships and how we all relate to each other through family, technology, and shared mythologies.
So the Whitney always tries to keep up to date, gives you some of the latest, hottest artists, something topical. It's just a Metro North ride away, and it's a world event, that's going on, a world art event, and it's something that's from film to theater to sculpture to painting. This is something to see.
Yeah, I've been very much impressed with some of the pieces the artists that are coming up.
I will just say that that event then also admission, this is new, they say it will be free for all visitors aged 25 and under, so that's actually quite nice as well. So a little bit of a freebie if you're a younger person. What do you have next for us?
All right, in Old Greenwich, from March 19th to the 22nd is Ephemera 46, which is an annual conference and fair. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with ephemera, if you like paper, you collect tickets, you collect valentines, you collect cash register receipts, whatever it is.
We've covered it before. This is one of the leading ephemera events in the country. Again, in Connecticut. I mean, I think there are hundreds of vendors, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And so everything from old menus, say on the Titanic, to wherever, you can find it there. Old photographs, old postcards. So it's a way to collect an antique that might cost you a dime, or it might cost you $20,000.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. If you like paper and you like graphics, go. You'll love it.
And you'll be amazed, as Greg was saying, how much some of these can actually go for if you take them to auction as well, especially if they're like first edition things as well. Great stuff. Tell us about your next event.
Next event is March 24th, and it's at 7:30 p.m. at Dolan School of Business at Fairfield University. And this is a conversation with Gina Barreca, who's a PhD at UConn, and she's a PhD of gender and feminist history.
I was about to say I'm a UConn English alum, so I do know Gina Barreca.
Anything you'd like to say about her?
Very well regarded, very nice lady.
Yeah, so it's the conversation's called "A Seat at the Table," celebrating the feast of Italian American culture. And she's a humorist, she's a best-selling author, and basically speaking about gender and troublemaking.
That's March 24th, that Tuesday. That will be the day at 7:30 p.m. and the Dolan School of Business event hall again at Fairfield University. Final one for us, Robin.
All right. Thursday, March 26th through May 7th, there's an art exhibition at Yale Institute of Sacred Music's Miller Hall in New Haven. And the exhibition is called Laboratory for Other Worlds. And Laboratory for Other Worlds imagines the life in the microscopic cosmos that climate scientists depend on for data. And basically, there are three people who are working on this. Andrew Kemp is a climate scientist. He is providing the data, and he works on salt marshes and sort of how salt marshes are part of our cosmos itself. Then there's Patty Loper, who is an artist and the series originator, and she's creating installations along with Erin Genia, who's an indigenous artist from the Dakota tribe, and they're all working together to create a conversation connecting the marsh to indigenous ecological knowledge, land stewardship practices, and community storytelling.
Amy's got a question.
No, I was just curious about the marshes, especially the salt marshes. What the connection is, or that she's trying to explore?
Yeah, Amy, it seems like they're looking at it as a way to not look at the marsh as something that is a resource that humans take advantage of, but is something that is part of us in a more integral way. So respecting that and trying to understand how we all interact with that rather than take from it.
Yeah, I like that perspective.
Sounds like a great thing. So that's Laboratory of Other Worlds, Thursday, March 26th until May 7th. It's the intersection of art and science, I suppose. Sounds fabulous. Robin, as always, thank you for all of those. That's all for this edition. My thanks goes to Robin, Greg, Amy, Charlotte and Ali. Don't forget to check out the digital pages of ctexaminer.com for the stories you've just heard and more, and our events calendar from Robin for all the latest local happenings. And while you're there, why not subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on all the week's news? It's just $20 for the year. This is CT Examiner Weekly, reporting and supporting what matters. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thanks for listening.